Understanding fire behaviour in tall and complex buildings demands a greater understanding of a wider range of variables that affect fire development and spread. We have to also think about the external factors, things like the wind, or things like how fire spreads on combustible cladding, things like the Coanda effect. Our understanding of fire behaviour is based on a 12.2 metre by 2.5 metre wide steel box. This steel box doesn't have any carpet, doesn't have any curtains. To a large degree, our confidence in compartmentation led us down a pathway we didn't pay enough attention to that. If you think about a lift shaft as a syringe, and if you think about the lift car itself as a plunger within that syringe or piston, right? And as the lift goes up and down, it's going to either cause a vacuum and suck smoke into the lift shaft, or as it goes up, it could pressurise smoke and push smoke upwards into higher floors. In America, they've had numerous fatalities. So identifying the wind impact on the building is a core component of the officer's dynamic risk assessment or size up, and it really brings to light the importance of having an external observer.
Ladies and gents, boys and girls, pronouns of your choosing, welcome back to the Firefighters Podcast. This is the long and awaited return of part 2 from our conversation with John Chubb. Cast your mind back to episode 116, and John shared with us some of the absolute essentials for firefighters operating in tall and complex buildings, as well as so many insights into the world of compartment fire behaviour training. In this part 2, John is really changing gears, and in all honesty, pretty much left me in the dust as we go into some of the aspects of high-rise factors such as blowtorch effect, piston effect, vents, false ceilings, hidden voids. Honestly, this part 2 is like an audible grab pack survival kit for firefighters operating in tall and complex buildings. Just want to say a big thanks to our partner of the podcast, William Wood Watches, being along for the journey and bringing this episode to you today. William Wood Watches are the creators of those beautifully crafted British luxury watches made from upcycled firefighting equipment. If you head over to their website, William Wood Watches, you'll be able to see their Chivalrous, Valiant, and their Triumph collection. I've had my William Wood watch for going on 3 years now, and I get no end of comments on the red watch strap. Now, these upcycled straps are just one of the unique pieces about the watch. For example, my red strap comes from the London Fire Brigade red hose. You've got the Tyne Weir hose that makes up the blue strap. Our British Armed Forces bring us the green fire hose. We've got the West Mids yellow fire hose and the William Wood Watches Elite Fire Kit 1. There's so much detail that goes into these watches. Despite just being a lover of what William Wood Watches do, I am also incredibly proud to say that last year they donated £40,000 to firefighting charities. So to get your hands on your beautifully crafted British luxury watch made from upcycled firefighting equipment, head over to williamwoodwatches.com. It was a real pleasure to have John on the podcast, and John really is part of that inner circle of truly inspiring people that are operating within this sector, a number of which we are currently in the process of planning in for future episodes. So without further ado, we're going to jump in there with John, and I will see you crazy cats on the other side. Now, there's been a lot of retrospective changes. We spoke about tall buildings and cladding and changing the heights and requirements of the risers and stuff that are inside them, but then also fire detection and fire separation. So when we retrospectively fit alarm systems, or when we change the telephone lines, or when we install gas and electric into these tall buildings, they go through a lot of retrospective changes, because one of the things that does affect internal fire spread in tall buildings is the level of fire separation. And I wanted to just ask if you could expand on how that affects fire spread in buildings and try and give people a little bit of an understanding of what they're looking for in ways that fire might spread in a building.
Okay, well, if you take it that most of your listeners have probably done compartment fire behaviour training, well, understanding fire behaviour in tall and complex buildings demands a greater understanding of a wider range of variables that affect fire development and spread. So if you think about internal factors within a building, you can have basically cavities and voids that are created to install services like air conditioning, cabling, heating. You have lifts and lift shafts, and this can result ultimately in fire behaviour that we describe as trench effects and chimney effects and the stack effect that we talked about earlier. The other aspect of fire behaviour in these buildings, apart from the internal components, is that we have to also think about the external factors. So we're now looking at things like the wind, or things like how fire spreads on combustible cladding, things like the Coanda effect, We're also thinking about how fire behaves in open plan structures. So here's the thing. Our understanding of fire behaviour is based on a 12.2 metre by 2.5 metre wide steel box. This steel box doesn't have any carpet, doesn't have any curtains, doesn't have any windows. And essentially, we're pretty good at predicting how a fire is going to spread in that type of environment. But when you start adding the building itself, the configuration of the building, and all these openings that we have guys drilling out and maybe doing it after the building is built to do modifications to the building. And we understand that if fire gases get into those cavities and those voids, the fire can spread unseen. And I haven't even mentioned suspended ceilings yet.
Oh, God. That's scary. That's killing firefighter territory. That is scary.
Yeah. So fire in these type of buildings requires a much better understanding of how the building itself is influencing the development of that combustion, far more than, shall we say, our steel container. So it's kind of a sea change. Yeah. And again, to go back to our American colleagues, I think they had a better understanding of how different building types needed to be categorized when they talk about combustible, heavy timber, non-combustible buildings. And to be fair to them, and I like to be open-minded about it, they really understood that the structure itself was going to have a really big impact on what they can expect from it during a fire. Yeah. Whereas that, to a large degree, our confidence in compartmentation led us down a pathway of maybe we didn't pay enough attention to that.
Yeah. Do you think we had kind of like an elitist view? We're quite good at building. You know, historically in the UK, we made quick advances in structural competence, you know, our builders and stuff, we got a good skill set. So we ended up with a lot of buildings which were perhaps built a little bit better, don't want to sound harsh there, than the creativity that you might find in different areas of, say, the US, where their available materials would vary significantly across the country because it's so big. So the differences in construction were far vaster, whereas we had perhaps a much more structured approach to how we were going to build all of our buildings, how we were going to separate them out. So we learned from maybe a bit of an elitist view. I don't know if I'm stretching there, but because we benefited from having all of our buildings done the same, we learned that way.
I think you're right, Pete. I think the standard of construction from the European perspective is much higher than North America. Even now, I think if you look, they basically had to get buildings up really fast to accommodate rapid expansion of a population that were effectively moving in from a European source. Yeah. So the dependence on timber, because it was so readily available, has morphed into variations of using timber in more clever ways. You know, these I-beams, we'd call them I-beams over here, but they'd make them from wood. Yeah. And I think the use of balloon frame construction, which was an old type construction where if a fire got in between the cavities, it was going to spread upstairs in a matter of minutes. Fast. So ultimately, we did have a certain amount of confidence, maybe arrogance, if you look at the increasing prevalence of timber frame and the difficulties that's causing, the increasing use of lightweight construction, which is kind of migrating back to the European heartlands, if you want.
And this was before the time when they were impregnating and treating materials with fire retardant capabilities. Because people might go now and go, well, actually, no, because in the UK, we're using a lot more timber frames now because housing it. Yeah, but the way we are pre-treating a lot of those materials is different now. So you're not looking at the same thing from, with the greatest respect, from an uneducated perspective, it may look like we're just going back to timber frames again, but we're treating all the materials in a very different way.
I think it's definitely better than maybe their efforts of 50 and 100 years ago, but I wouldn't discount the problems with timber frame or variations on timber frame. They're going high-rise with them as well now, Pete. So you have the argument for sustainability, and I completely respect that. Yeah. But I would argue that the tests that are done to timber frame structures, particularly tall and complex, they don't take into account the influence of the wind. No. They don't take into account the influence of electric vehicles.
No, we've got a hotel in one of the areas that I work, and I'm not going to talk poorly on any particular hotel chain, but it is a 6-story building with no riser, and it's a timber frame construction, and that scares me a lot. I just feel like it's a ticking time bomb, that one specifically.
I think so. And what's it going to be like in 60 years' time?
I know. Anyway, we digress. It scares me.
Okay.
I wanted to ask you, as we were speaking then about the infrastructure that's required in some of these buildings, we mentioned about lifts. I did just want to double click on lifts and the piston effect, because it's something we'd be remiss if we didn't cover it in terms of how people navigate their ways up and down tall buildings. But that adds another layer of complexity when we speak about the effects that can have on fires.
If you think about a lift shaft as a syringe, and if you think about the lift car itself as a plunger within that syringe, or a piston, right? And as the lift goes up and down, it's going to either cause a vacuum and suck smoke into the lift shaft, or as it goes up, it could pressurize smoke and push the smoke upwards into higher floors. So what does that mean to us as firefighters? Well, it means that when we commandeer a firefighting lift, that ideally all the other lifts, if they're wired properly, they should cease to function, as you know, because they're supposed to be part of the cause and effect strategy of the building, and they should cease to work. But when we're going to use firefighting lifts, we have to basically move upwards incrementally. Now, this is really important in that what we would have normally done in the past is simply go to 2 floors or 3 floors below the reported fire floor. So what we've learned from our colleagues in North America is that when you get into the lift on, say, the ground floor, and you're moving up to, say, to get out, say, 2 floors below the fire on, say, the 15th floor, you should be moving up at 2 or 3 floors at a time.
Yeah.
And every time you get up the 3rd floor, you should be standing outside the lift car and shining a torch up to make sure you're not ascending into smoke. And then if you see smoke in the lift shaft, you should simply walk. It's as simple as you shouldn't be using that lift car because of the piston effect and because of the effect that it could have on the lift. Even a firefighting lift, as you know, has a lot of backups in terms of backup wiring, backup power supplies.
Separate power.
But they don't do well in water. They don't do well in smoke. So this little ecosystem inside the lift shaft is something we have to be careful of. And we have to be aware we could be absolutely spreading smoke around the building. Yeah,
because people look at a lift and it obviously has its very obvious benefits, both for ourselves and the public, i.e. it's quicker, it's efficient, but with so many things that have those sort of characteristics, they also come with inherent dangers. You say they're about 2 or 3 floors. That's something that we haven't necessarily adopted as much as I think we should have, because like you say, if you move up there really fast, the pressure of that plunger effect that you created there, it's a bit like the bellows of a fire. When people look at the old pictures of like someone stoking a fire in an outdoor cooking facility, and then they have something that pushes air into it. That's a similar effect, like you said, with that plunger effect you said there, where it pushes it up. You want to be going up 2 or 3 floors, stepping out, letting the pressure balance, because if you go up incrementally, it won't push it all up at once. It'll allow that balance. But glancing up into the lift shaft, so you're not getting that fire spread, you're not getting that smoke spread, and straddle it so you can see that gap in between.
Yeah, now some lift shafts, people have a vent at the top, but they don't all, not all of them.
No, if you ascend it really fast, and I did want us to just briefly touch on vents, because there was something that was again fitted retrospectively, and these can tie in to the alarm panels that if anything is detected on those certain floors, some of these will open automatically. It's not necessarily going to reduce the likelihood of the fire happening or spreading, but it will reduce some of these effects that you were speaking about in terms of stack effects and piston effects in lift shafts. It will reduce the impact of our actions and also the environmental actions, allowing us to effectively get there a little bit quicker, but without bringing with it all of the air pressure and the challenges of ventilation in a building like that.
Yeah, I'd agree, but we've also got to be cognizant of the fact that the automatic smoke control systems, whether they be an AOV at the top of a stairwell, whether they be pressurized systems or non-pressurized systems, these smoke shafts tend to be close to the building core, Pete, and they're only supposed to open on the fire floor, so they tend to be sized around a very small amount of smoke production. So the idea of a guy, say, having a fire in his apartment, the guy leaves his apartment, the closing the closer works and closes the door behind him, that small gulp of smoke is what these smoke vents are sized around.
Yeah.
If he leaves the door open or the closing mechanism isn't working, the corridor or the lobby will quickly become filled with smoke because they're not designed to deal with that amount of smoke.
No.
But there's another problem with them, and I refer to ventilation flow paths, in that if you put a smoke shaft close to the building core and the apartment door is open, the heat, flame and smoke coming out of that apartment will be drawn towards the building core where that shaft is. And that's precisely where the firefighters will be coming from the stairwell.
Yep.
So if you were designing a system, placing the smoke shaft close to the building core is potentially the worst position for that vent. And you couldn't pick a worse place.
No.
But because it's cheaper, put it there.
It's cheap. The efficiencies when people are putting the construction in, they're like, legally, you need to put one of these in place. So they just try and do it in the most cost-effective manner, don't they?
Yeah, and so where would we like them? We would like them to be at the opposite end, or further away, the opposite position away from where the firefighters are entering, so that the flame, heat, and smoke will be pulled away from the firefighter. But that's a cost. So that mightn't always happen. I think Paul Grimmond is actually campaigning for that right now.
That's the thing, that when you hear people in the public sector trying to influence things in the private sector, that's a really difficult landscape to navigate politically, because we're operating from an environment of firstly firefighter safety and public safety, and trying to implement something that we have got good data behind. But when you're coming up against enormous costs and people trying to make financially marginally beneficial decisions, it gets very political very fast. And you might feel like you're just screaming into the void, because the things that you are suggesting aren't inherently challenged in terms of the legitimacy. It's just the cost that comes with some of these, the things that we learn, and we go, you're right, but it's too expensive and we're not going to do it.
That's the reality, isn't it?
Tough. There's two things I wanted to just expand on, just to give people appreciation for what we're talking about. You said about pressurized stairwells and stuff like that. That might be something people are unfamiliar with, and that is a case of, correct me if I'm wrong, where in case people do open doorways when they're trying to evacuate, like you say, the most important thing to keep safe and keep clear of smoke is that stairwell. So these are pressurized stairwells that will have a positive pressure system installed in the building somehow, which stops when they open the door. It almost creates an invisible layer of pressure that stops any smoke coming into the stairwell. Am I describing that in the right way?
Yeah, pretty good. They generally don't work independent of another feature. So if you have a fan pressurizing a stairwell and it brings it up to 50 pascals, very low pressure, but it's enough to keep smoke out.
Yeah.
You also have a smoke shaft working on the other side of the door, normally in the lobby. Okay. So what happens is the smoke that's coming from, say, the apartment, is when somebody opens the door into the lobby and then follows into the stairs, this smoke shaft will normally draw out that smoke, and it can either be mechanical or a natural chimney effect, like a vent just going from the car park right up to the roof. The problem occurs with these systems is when the doors open and the pressure in the stairwell reduces, because the door has been opened and multiple people leaving. So what they do is they have two fans, one in the smoke shaft in the lobby and another fan in the stairwell. And as somebody opens the door, the fan in the stairwell speeds up so that they can maintain the pressure.
It's a very smart system. And when the door
very smart system. They are now, and they're pretty good, but like everything else, they need maintenance. And I always worry, what is it going to be like when the building's 60?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's changed hands a few times, and it's so costly to sustain some of these things. And people living in the building will be probably completely unaware of what they actually do, so they won't be that concerned if they don't work anymore. They might even be glad of it, because sometimes you can hear them operating and people might miss that, and they won't unless we have enough fire protection officers, assessing these buildings and making sure they stay up to regulations. They inevitably stop working at some point. And I don't want to get negative with that, and I don't want to panic anybody that lives.
I think we have to be realistic. Yeah. And then the other thing as well I'd have to say to you is this: when we're trying to ventilate the structure, how do they interact with our PPV?
Yeah.
How does the pressurized stairwell and the negative pressure smoke shaft in the lobby, and some of those smoke shafts can be in the corridor itself, how do they affect our interactions when we're actually trying to use ventilation strategies? So I've asked lots of people about this, and I've never got a definitive answer, Pete, because if you talk to the smoke management engineers, they will tell us, no, you shouldn't really be doing that anything with them. They should be allowed to work automatically.
Yeah.
But from your experience, there's times we don't want to ventilate.
Yeah.
And there's other times where we do. So these tend to take that out of our control. So it's something we're going to have to get good at.
Yeah, because it's when again, we talk about different environments. It's when our approach with a domestic premise, where we would gladly instigate positive pressure ventilation because we know there's no inbuilt ventilation procedure. So we can manage the flow path ourselves manually. When we take that to a lot, people go, oh, well, a high rise is the same as domestic one, just it's 10 floors up. Well, in some capacities, i.e. your internal firefighting in the compartment might be similar as long as you're not at too great a height, blowtorch, blah, 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 blah. We'll get into that in a minute. But the fact that they then have these inbuilt systems like the ventilation aspects you were speaking about there, that we can't just take the same PPV approach that we would do with a domestic premise and try and apply that to a tall building, because they're going to collide. Two infrastructures and the technology behind them isn't going to dovetail together very well.
Yeah, and the fact is, I don't think anyone has done a lot of tests. I don't think we have the science yet to know how they interact.
No,
so to some
it's
degree,
such a large scale test to do. And there's not when people build these tall buildings, they want to get people living in them pretty quickly. They don't like to give us a couple of months to put together a test.
So it's something we're just going to have to learn vicariously from experience.
Absolutely. I wanted to just go back quickly and just cover two things. We spoke about suspended ceilings briefly. Could you just elaborate on concrete structures, false ceilings, the dangers, and some of the fatalities that we've experienced in how they can really put a risk to firefighters' lives with, again, the retrospective changes we made to these?
I'll give an example of an incident we attended, and it was a close thing. It was I tell you how long ago it was. It was a video shop, a video rental shop, and there was a fire down the very back of it, 25 meters in, and it was a tanning booth on fire.
Wow!
And our guys went in, and the area was clear there was no smoke, so they took a first aid with, and little did they know that the suspended ceiling was masking a layer of smoke that was moving above them, but not only above them, it went past them and it was heading towards the door. So when it did ignite, it caught them completely by surprise because they didn't even see any smoke. So the actual suspended ceiling acts like a cavity, and it can mask where the smoke is, and it can mask at what level. There could even be flames because there'll be a certain amount of fire resistant in some of these suspended ceiling tiles. And when they do kind of expose themselves to the firefighter can find themselves very deep into a building and maybe without a backup line. Yeah. So what we encourage guys to do, and maybe people have different views on it, we have to use smooth bores with dry risers because of the hydraulic characteristics. Yep. We want them to knock down the suspended ceiling tiles.
Yeah,
we want to know what's going on.
There's a few dangers as well in, like, if people if they're lucky enough to get an early attack on a fire and the false ceiling is still intact, that's beneficial because they can get an early attack. But it's that midpoint where the fire's developed enough, there's enough heat around the ceiling layer that these false ceilings, or these suspended ceilings, begin to fail, and you tend to see a lot of, I don't want to say lazy electricians, but maybe when they're outfitting a massive building like an office block really fast, they might have a load of spare cable, and you'll see this if you ever pop your head above false ceilings or tiled ceilings, that you look up there's a lot of cable lying around all of these lights and stuff like that, and when that falls down on a firefighter in there, that's where we've seen a few fatalities, and it can get very dangerous when firefighters suddenly become entangled in hot, live sometimes, cabling, and it's wrapped around the BA sets and their head, and they can't see where they're going. And this is before we had cable entrapment cutters and stuff like that. I don't think we're seeing as much of it now. I think we did it because the concrete ceilings look quite ugly, or they thought it did, certainly maybe 15, 20 years ago. But I think, like, we go into a lot of premises now where they actually don't put them ceilings in anymore, and they don't mind having, you can see the ventilation ducts and you can see the cable tracks and the cable trays that are up in this, and people don't seem to mind anymore. But there was a period of time, and there's still a lot of structures around where they have these large false ceilings in place, don't they?
Agreed. And I think, as you say, we're starting to become a little bit more industrial design, more minimalist.
Yeah.
And maybe it's a good thing, because we can see exactly what's going on.
Yeah. And also the blowtorch effect. We spoke about it briefly. People, when you get up in tall buildings, they don't appreciate the change in weather from when they're standing on the street to when they're then 15 floors up. Could you briefly just talk about the blowtorch effect and the dangers that poses to people?
The blowtorch effect is a variation on a ventilation flow path. And the best way I would describe this would be that a fire is a pressure phenomenon. And the fire itself will generate pressurized gases that seek to equalize into areas of lower pressure. Now, if you have a fire in an apartment, and let's say the door is open in the apartment, and let's say the smoke shaft is functioning, if the window fails in an apartment, you will get a ventilation flow path pushed by the wind, pushing the heat and smoke developed by the fire, and it will go towards an area where it can depressurize, which could be a window or it could be a smoke shaft that's working. So the blowtorch effect, or a wind-driven fire, which is probably better known as internationally, is you have a triangle. So you need a fire in the middle, and you need an inlet where the wind is going in, and you need a downwind outlet where the fire can go to. And it's an extremely dangerous event. I know you've had fatalities in the UK, Harrow Court, and in America they've had numerous fatalities.
Yeah.
So identifying the wind impact on the building is a core component of the officer's dynamic risk assessment or size up, and it really brings to light the importance of having an external observer.
Yeah.
For tall and complex
It
work.
can happen so fast as well. You can have all of your infrastructure set up internally, believing you're in control of a lot of the environmental factors, and then suddenly one of the windows fails. And they're pretty good with double glazing and the way that a lot of the windows are built now. But as soon as it fails, the accelerated rate at which the ventilation pours into that compartment, and if you don't know the strategic move that you need to make to control or reduce the effect of that inrush, firefighters can just be stood in an inferno that's blazing through a compartment, and it can quickly get back to the bridgehead. And people that thought they were set up in an area of clear ventilation or clean air can just quickly get engulfed in the change of the airflow in the building.
That's why I think it's so important that as part of one of your prescriptive scenarios for training has to be a wind-driven fire.
Absolutely.
And how to deal with it. So what we've introduced is obviously transitional attack, and we can use an aerial appliance to do that if necessary. We've also introduced the floor below branch, which means that we can apply water literally from a pipe that's kind of a 60-degree bend in it to the floor above it. And then also the consideration that if we can't get into that apartment, that we put 2 smoke curtains on the door. And if possible, we will fight that fire from the apartment beside it through the plasterboard wall.
Yeah, absolutely.
If possible. So it's about realising if you could have 3 lines of hose, Pete, and if you're downwind of a fully involved fire that gets impacted by the breeze, that water won't do anything.
No. Yeah.
You need to be getting the water in from upwind.
So, John, we've spoken about so many different considerations that the crews, the firefighters, the incident commander needs to be aware of when they go into an incident. Some people might feel a little bit paralysed by the amount of things they've got to consider. So with all of that into consideration, we have come up with ways that people should be applying those resources. So give us a bit of an understanding of how you see, not maybe the perfect method, but the method of application of those limited, because they are limited resources when we're arriving at these incidents.
Well, the first thing I would say is that the normal methodology applied to incident command, it's task focused, and usually the experience and the decision making of the incident commander are basically nurtured when they go on the courses. The problem with tall and complex or high-rise buildings is that the level of complexity about the buildings and the amount of different tasks that have to be achieved will quickly overwhelm somebody.
It will. It's that whole paralysis through analysis, isn't it? You can just get overwhelmed and feel like you're rabbit in the headlights.
So what happened was, when I started to study SOGs, I took a pretty academic approach to as many SOGs I could put my hands on from the UK, from Germany. I had to get Google Translate, and from North America. And so what I did was I did a classic
standard operating guidance, aren't they? Versus national operating guidance or standard operating procedures, SOPs and NOGs and TOGs, and so just to give people understanding.
So what I did was I applied an academic approach to see where they agreed, where they disagreed, and what emerged from that process of analysis. And what I quickly identified was that our American and our German colleagues went for prescriptive tasking. So rather than a divisional officer or a senior officer arriving and try to figure out what he's going to do with all his resources, but they go on the approach of first arriving, second arriving, third arriving, and so on. Yeah. And I quickly arrived at the conclusion that this was the way to go, because the tasks were easily identifiable, and it was possible to identify a group of subtasks and how important and what priority they should be given. Yeah. So here's what we do in Dublin, right? And again, I'm not claiming I invented this. I just simply adapted it to where
because it's like combination locks, isn't it? If you've got the right code but you do it in the wrong order, the safe won't open. Do you know what I mean? All of these things are important, but you've got to do them in the right order. Otherwise, you'll find yourself on the back foot and not achieve the result.
Exactly. So the first arriving station officer, I know you use slightly different terminology, he or she will go to the bridgehead. That was the first decision, because I noticed in some brigades they sent up the junior officer, which could be a sub-officer. I think you call it a crew commander, is it?
Yeah, crew commanders, crew officers, crew managers.
And it occurred to me that if you send up the most junior person, every single decision that's made after that event is based on the most junior person's view.
Yeah, it's really harsh, isn't it? Because some people think that the person in charge stands at the bottom, but all the action's happening aloft. And it's really unfair on the person that's actually in charge of the bridgehead. And just to clarify, the bridgehead is often 1 or 2 floors below the scene of the fire. They're making all the decisions.
So we put the station officer up there in the bridgehead. And the station officer then is the most senior available officer at that time. And he or she then determines the next course of action. Yeah. Second arriving officer takes the lobby, and that could be a station officer or a sub officer. And the lobby sector then basically acts as accountability for every person going into that building that mightn't be under air. But in other words, we keep track of our personnel. But also that sub officer or station officer determines what the next set of tasks that need to be allocated are and to whom.
Yeah.
So the third arriving officer becomes the water sector. And you might say, you're going a bit early with that. But if you think about a dry riser, it needs 1,500 litres a minute. Yeah. And a TL needs 2,000. So we need 3,500 litres of water. That just doesn't appear from a couple of hydrants. So applying a water sector officer early is a really good thing to do.
We've seen this in a few case studies where people have gone aloft before they've secured water, and if you're not with crews that are familiar with the patches, and when I say patch, I mean the area and the station area that they're covering, it might take them a while in the middle of the night to find the right hydrants and find enough of them to be able to charge that riser to a significant level. And we've had it, like I say, in case studies where people are aloft, they've got all the bridgeheads set up and they haven't secured water, and people die.
Yeah, agreed. So that's why the water sector officer has to be front loaded. And then the fourth arriving officer is a little bit flexible, but in general, the officer becomes part of the incident command with the district or the divisional officer, and the crew go up to the bridgehead, and some of them, and they become the emergency team for BA, and they also do command support functions both on the ground and in the bridgehead. So that was a big thing, that the bridgehead needs a command support early. Absolutely. Because he or she is basically forward operations, if you want, and that chap or girl could be running a search and a firefighting operation. Yeah. So then when the district officer arrives, he or she takes overall command and effectively becomes instant commander, but their main function is logistical and administrative support, because the forward commanders, as you say, is at the pointy end.
Yeah, and it's like a pressure cooker when you're in there. When you're on that bridgehead, it's both logistically, informationally, And also, just like the size of the platform is not a lot of space. There's a lot of people all stood next to a riser with BA boards and, firefighter and trying to get all the right information. And then it's a pressure cooker of information happening aloft, all happening very quickly in very close proximity.
Exactly. So that chap or that girl needs command support real quick. The first arriving ET or rescue tender becomes logistic support. And the idea behind that is, even if we had 20 firefighters up at the bridgehead, gives you about half an hour to 40 minutes of firefighting. Yeah. That's it. You run out of air. So the ET then becomes logistic support with a prime function of getting extra air up there. Then as the incident develops, they become planning and logistics. They might even separate them if the incident gets bigger to two separate functions of command. And then the first aerial that arrives does aerial stuff. That could be transitional attack, water tower, or it could be rescue. So that's for a type 1 building. So you get 4 pumps, you get a TL, you get an ET, and you get a district officer. If you go to a type 2, it goes to 2 district officers and an extra pump. If you go to a type 3 building, you get an extra pump. Every single one of those jobs, every single one of those tasks, we've identified and justified the personnel required, and we've sequenced what they do on arrival. And what we've done is taken a burden off the incident commander that all the components of a tall and complex operation go into place in sequence as people arrive, and they simply report that they're doing it. They don't wait to be tasked.
It's really, really useful structure, and we have it in flashcards, effectively, like laminated cards on the appliances. So your first, second, third, the guys and girls know what locker to go to, if they're taking the BA, if they're taking the board, if they need to take breaking in kit, if they're taking the emergency set, who does what, who's getting in the lift, who's doing the landing valves. It's a really, really useful structure. Also assists the control in there, like they say, the PDA, the predetermined attendance, of not, arbitrarily sending lots and lots of people and just trying to crowd the incident ground. It's a much more logical, systematic effect. And like you say, as we are getting more and more tall buildings crop up left, right and centre, it's not like there was in the past where there's just one in the local area, and if it happens, just send everybody. Well, now you might have 3 or 4 high-rise, certainly in the capital cities and stuff like that. You might have 3 or 4 tall buildings, incidents happening at once. So you need to have a structured level of resource requirement to be able to put these into a plan. You can't just keep sending everybody.
I think so. And that goes against our normal thought process, because we like to see ourselves as kind of turning a job into an art form where incident commanders use their ingenuity, their experience, a combination of their imagination. And this to some degree takes that away from them. But I think as they get into it, they appreciate, well, hang on a sec, this is taking a burden off me so that I can focus on the tactical and the strategic objective.
Absolutely. Like I said on a recent podcast, is it allows you to have freedom within the discipline. And what I mean by that is, if you master the discipline, It's a bit like driving a car. You just need to learn to drive this one way. And then once you've learnt that discipline, then you have freedom within the discipline to branch out and adapt to the ever-changing environment that you're going to come across in the road. But you need to nail the discipline first. It's like when people come on a station and go, oh, well, that firefighter's not doing it that way. Why do I have to? Just because I'm a recruit? Because they've got the discipline. And then they've got the freedom to interact with the unknowns in their environment, to adapt their known disciplines to that ever-changing external environment, like an incident. But you've got to get the discipline first.
So what we did as well, and I think you guys are doing it already, I say we're just excellent plagiarists, Pete. I'm not claiming to be innovative. We have tactical aid memoirs.
Yep.
And one of the big things I noticed was, I'm not talking about necessarily British or American, I'm talking about in general, people talk about establishing bridgeheads, lobbies, talking about this sector, but they never told people what to do when they're in charge of those sectors.
Yes.
So we developed tactical aid memoirs that if you're given a task as whether it be water sector, lobby sector, that it tells you what to do. Yeah. And then the next phase was we developed, and this is a fancy phrase, but it isn't really, it's that complicated. We developed decision support algorithms in a more straightforward way, flow charts.
Yeah.
So officers can make decisions and apply a set of agreed tactical solutions to those problems.
Yeah. It's like pouring a problem into a system, and as it transitions through the different variations and outcomes, it can then punch out some things that you can then apply your experience to. It's not trying to take all the thinking away from you, but it's a systematic way of discounting some situations and then support it doesn't replace your thought process, but it should support your thought process so that you don't get blinkered into something that you don't need to focus on. You can quickly discount it with a logical thought process.
For sure. And then I have to give credit now to Paul Grimwood that he designed his own system of support for tactical decision making called RICE, RICE, and the umbrella concept behind our TAC aids is the RICE model. It's just that we've made them a little bit more granular depending on what type of conditions present. So what we teach guys is 7, shall we say, predicted type of emergencies, and hopefully without boring you too much, we teach them that you might have a tenable, which I mean smoke-free stairwell, and a tenable corridor or lobby. And then when things start getting bad, when people leave their doors open, you could have a tenable stairwell and a smoke-filled corridor or lobby. We call it tenable, untenable. And then if you have a very badly managed building, you could have an untenable stairwell full of smoke and an untenable corridor. And then the next thing we add on is a wind-driven fire. Yeah. We follow that up with a building failure. This is a Grenfell style event.
Scary. Yeah.
And then the last one we planned for, and you mightn't seem particularly intuitive, but an underground car park for, which is part of the same building.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like a high-rise flipped on its head, because certainly you can descend down 2 or 3 floors in some basements and sub-basements. But no, I think you're right, and I don't think we should. I think we're getting a lot better at not worrying about not even plagiarism, like copy and pasting, because it's amazing what you can achieve when you don't mind who gets the credit. And I think that requires a lot of humility from seeing these wonderful practices and the outcomes of the decades of learning from people like yourself and Paul Grimwood, being able to let go of our egos and see great recognized practices and just have an ability to swallow our pride and go, that works. Let's copy and paste and adapt ever so slightly if needed, but don't try and reinvent the wheel. Give the compliments where it's due. And that's what the podcast is all about, really, is recognizing those wonderful practices and hoping that if people haven't heard of them, they can come across it. And if they want to claim it as their own, claim it as their own. Like I say, it doesn't matter as long as the outcome is that we're creating more effective firefighters to support, safer communities, then it doesn't matter. I don't mind who gets the credit if the benefit is true. I wanted to change gears now and make things a little more personal, because like I said during one of our brief chats before, sometimes I'm secretly more interested in the person than I'm in the context. Now, there's so much happening in terms of technology, innovation, the ways of working in the fire service, different changes that we've spoken about and ways that people can adopt these. So I wanted to ask you, over your many 34, 35 years of experience in the fire service, you've worked with lots of great leaders. How do you think some of the most effective ways that leaders manage change in some of these fire services, and what's the most effective way of supporting people in managing change?
I think that our nature as organizations, and we're all very same, is that we constantly adjust to changes in the built environment. So we tend to be reactive. So I would say the personalities or the characteristics of a very good leader in our type of business would be people who are good horizon scanners. And rather than being reactive, I think they should be trying to be proactive. So how can you do that? Well, I think that leaders of emergency services should be trying to stay closer to the planners and the people who are designing the cities.
Yeah.
And I think rather than this disconnect occurring between people deciding what they're going to do in a local government situation and the fire service, I think we should be trying to engage with these politicians early, and I think our leaders should be doing that. I think a really good leader would be more outward looking than current, in that we tend to get goalkeepers rather than strikers as leaders, and I hope that doesn't sound too bad.
No, I love that. I love the horizon scanners as well. Never heard of it described like that. It's wonderful.
I think we get what's described sometimes as a safe pair of hands as leaders, and very conservative, very inward-looking people who tend to make the people who appoint them feel comfortable, rather than the people who are looking outwardly, looking at international developments, looking at what's happening around the world and what we can learn. I think you mentioned that earlier. I think we need leaders that are more open to a diversification of skills. And I know this will definitely be controversial, what I'm going to say, Pete, but I really think we should all be heading towards fire-based EMS. I know that a lot of people feel strongly about that in the UK, and I respect their views on it. But here's the reality. The fire calls are going down. I think we're going to be looking at a future where we're going to have less calls. I think we'll eventually see an awful lot of our problems engineered out, maybe even sprinkler systems in domestic houses. When we do have emergencies, they're going to be less frequent but more severe. And I think we need somebody at the helm, so to speak, that looks at an organisation that they want to develop rather than they want to make efficient in terms of financial. So what seems to be happening is financial efficiency seems to be taking prevalence over operational efficiency. And my view is that we'd be lucky if we get leaders that are looking to achieve efficiencies other than financial efficiencies. I'd like to see a range of skills, a range of services diversify, and I would like to see us engage more with the public. And I would like to see, as you pointed out earlier in the conversation, we should be letting people know what a fantastic group and what a fantastic set of skills we have.
It's like so that's speaking the type of leader. To the choir, mate. Honestly, I feel like you're talking into a mirror there, because I said for so long now, and you've just articulated it probably better than I ever could, that our biggest ironic barrier is exactly what you've just said there. It's those really fantastic, really competent, really professional, honest, driven, passionate people with a fixed mindset is just our biggest barrier. They've got the best intentions, but they're going to ride that horse of tradition into the abyss of obliviousness and insignificance, where we will find ourselves singularly skilled. We need to diversify into that multi-layered problem solver, that multi-skilled emergency services responder. We're not going to stop doing what we're doing, but it's just going to be one component of what we do. And there's an absolute cornucopia of development there for the person that wants to pick up all of these skills. We're not trying to go out into the unknown by ourselves. People have done this successfully, and I think it will provide a more engaged workforce, because there will be lots more layers of development for people rather than and again, there's so many aspects we've spoken about here that I feel you could spend 30 years as a firefighter and still never finish developing, but there's more layers to it.
We've a fire-based EMS, and I know I'm very proud of it, and I know I'm selling it, and I know I'm biased. But can you imagine a scenario where you're a road traffic collision and that the staff on the ambulance, the paramedics, are firefighters, and the staff that are doing the extrication are paramedics, and the interaction and the total understanding of what those components and how they fit together is tacit. And when we do take people out, that the firefighter, or whoever's wearing the firefighter uniform that day, can help the paramedics in giving advanced life support. And ultimately, I'll give you this statistic, which we're very, very proud on. If you have a cardiac event, Dublin is the third safest city in the world to have that. Because when someone has a cardiac event, if the ambulance is at the hospital or an ambulance they turn out a fire engine with 5 paramedics and all of the same equipment, apart from the stretcher, of course, that the ambulance has. And the intervention window is narrow, and we're saving lives. And so that's our prime function, is to save lives. So that doesn't take away from those guys as firefighters. It also, and I know this sounds a slightly different take on it, it also promotes excellent pay, promotes better advancement in different ranges of skills. And you know what it does as well? From the time our new guys go on the ambulance, it's developing their decision making. It's developing their calmness under pressure because they're doing it all the time. So even though it has its own challenges in maintaining skills, I'm not going to deny those, it actually brings us on as an organization. And I see talented people all over the world. We're all capable of doing this. We're all capable of doing, and I think it's the mandate we have is to give the public the best service and the best chance of surviving these traumatic events. And that's what we do. That's what we're good at. We're better than, I'm telling you this now, a fire service is better than anybody at providing this. Diversify or die.
That's diversity. I love that. That's a soundbite right there. So we've spoken so much about personal development, and you, I secretly feel, are the similar to myself, are that eternal student. So I wanted to ask you yourself, turn the mirror around and say, what is your approach to personal development now? How does it play a role in your life today?
I think the moment you stop challenging yourself, the moment you will go into a decay as a person. I've spent my entire career on the operational side, and we've been through it all, and I loved every minute of it. But I'm 60 now, and I have to allow for the fact that time catches up with everybody, right? So I could have retired 5 years ago. I still love the thing, so I'm not going to go until I want to go. So what happened was I've been offered a new challenge, and again, this ethos of continually seeking to be better than you were, the last time you thought about yourself, is a whole new challenge for me. I'm going into this operational intelligence. I did a master's in science when I was 50.
Jesus, man, you're making me feel worse every time you say something. You did a master's
no, not really.
at 50.
Not really.
I love it.
I think I'm just obsessive compulsive, a little bit. So what happens is this was in emergency management. So this new job gives me a chance to set up a new unit. And we're not as sophisticated as you guys are in the UK, but and I'm going to intend to talk to some of the top people over there. We're going to set up a proper risk analysis group, a proper computerized GIS-based group. So I see that as a huge challenge to me, and I'm surrounded by a data scientist, a fire engineer, people who are eminently more qualified than I am, but I think I can bring it together as a team.
Absolutely.
I think that I can try and facilitate their conquering all the politics that are in their way, and I think people need to keep developing. So when I retire, we talk about personal development. I want to learn to do something different.
Yeah,
it can't be anything to do with the fire brigade. So whether it's photography, whether it's sailing, I don't know.
It's so exciting, isn't it? I envy people.
I think we just
when they have that opportunity in their life, because they get to that age, and people say retirement like it's something that is gonna give them freedom, but I think you've got the whole thing backwards when people think about it that way. If you're not doing something now, and again, I appreciate for some this is an elitist view, but you've had such a widespread and engaging career because you've leaned into it and you've chosen to pursue something that you have such a passion for. And if you're able to or if you take opportunity of the things that are given to you to really engage in something that you're passionate about, you get to retirement age and you say to yourself, I want to keep doing this. There's so much more, because every time you learn something new, it's a little bit like turning a corner. You think the corner was the destination, and you get there and you turn the corner and go, oh my God, there's something else. There's something else. It's like different layers of a mountain. You break through the clouds and go, oh my God, I thought this was the peak, but there's another peak, and there's another peak, and some people will hear that and go, oh, so you're just going to workaholic till you're dead. You know what? It's not work if you enjoy it.
Exactly. And come here, it's not the peak, it's the journey to the peak.
Absolutely. It's what it makes of you along the journey. I secretly I don't think I ever will reach that. It's like the podcast. Every time I listen back to it, I cringe listening to myself because I know how much better it can be, and I know how I could ask the question differently. And, I hear all the people that you rattle off, and I keep making notes because I'm like, oh my God, I can't wait to speak to that person. And it doesn't mean you're not living in the moment. And people hear like what you're saying, they go, don't you look forward to when you can just relax and enjoy yourself, John? Or people say to me like, oh, can't you just switch off? I'm like, what do you want to switch off from? If your life is something you want to, if you want to switch off from your life, you're doing it wrong. It's like when people say, I need to unplug or I need to switch off, then what you're engaging in is not something you should be doing. You shouldn't have to want to unplug from it. And this is not about, wanting to work until you're dead. It's about work-life balance is a strange thing. I think it's an illusion. I think work-life balance is is something that came out of an economy where we forced people to engage in work that they didn't enjoy, and then we had to create a balance out the back end of it because it was secretly killing people physically and mentally. And I think when you said that, you're like, oh, I'm turning 60 now. People will have they've been listening for the last 2 hours, and they'll be like, what? The dude is 60? And you sound more gregarious and interesting and vibrant than perhaps I do. I don't think people would hear any difference when they're listening to us, other than the extensive experience you've got in comparison to myself.
It has to be fun. It is fun. And at the end of the day, as you say, switch off. What does that mean? What does it mean?
What does it mean? I wanted to ask you, and I always find this a bit of a strange question because it's not based around regret or anything like that, but is there anything that you wish you'd known when you started your career?
I think normally Boy Scouts like me, and I'm people who want to do the right thing for the right reasons.
Yeah.
And they come up with sometimes, this is a great way of doing, this is a great idea, this is a great technique, this is a fantastic piece of equipment. Let's buy this, let's get into that. Sometimes we don't understand the political dimension required to make things happen. And when I say regret, I wish I had known how to manage the political component of bringing about change better. I think if you look at people in our position, in my position, about looking at stuff on its merits from an operational point of view, sometimes we don't have the skills to bring about the change necessary in the political dynamic that's presenting. And I wouldn't go as far as to say as a regret, but I'm sorry I didn't work on that aspect more carefully, more cleverly, to make things happen more efficiently.
Yeah, but ironically, isn't that the power that you've got now as well? Because when you spoke there about the work you're involved in now, and you're working with people who you rightly identify as being very academically competent, the level of awareness that you bring to the party is because people that are often very academically competent means they've existed in an environment where they've done isolated self-study for a long time, and they often miss out on the human interaction, the political awareness, the human behavior side of being able to, it's the sell versus the tell. I always say, you have the ability because of your experiences to sell the advantages of what they have found out, what they've discovered through their academic studies, versus if somebody academically just tries to present information sometimes, if they do it in such a clinical fashion, sometimes, not always, but they can do it in a clinical fashion where they can't get people on board because it's just a tell. They're just saying, look, I've done the studies, I'm far more intelligent than you. And they don't say it like this, I know. But, and they lose, sometimes they have the best of intention and it just doesn't quite land. Whereas you have got such a Goliath of experience, and you know how it doesn't work because you've done it wrong in the past, but now you can navigate your way through that and assist other people in helping those changes.
Exactly. And that was my point about, I wish I'd had a better political acumen when I was younger to try and make things change. So you're quite right. And I think sometimes a new concept in any organization needs a champion, but you also need a political mind behind that to get beyond just the enthusiasm and the practicalities of the idea.
Have you done things like the Bell Bin before? Have you done Bell Bin tests and or Myers-Briggs or anything like that?
I did that Myers-Briggs thing.
Myers-Briggs is slightly different, but if you look at Bell Bin, BELBIN, for anybody that wants to go and look at it. This is a way of looking at the type of teams that you might want to structure if you were trying to make a change. And you make a great point there, because you'll need an enthusiastic starter, an articulate orator, but you'll also need your person that's very data-driven. You'll need your completer finisher, who is, because I'm a terrible completer finisher. I am wonderful at being the sometimes serial and or some people might say naive optimist of standing at the front and rallying a crowd and getting everybody behind something, but I can be terrible at being the completer finisher, which is the person that comes behind and makes sure everything, you do what you say you were going to do, and you don't just leave things half built. You don't want to be the person that goes, I'm a great starter, I've got half built structures all over the place. You know what I mean? You don't want to be that person because that's not the way to live your life.
I think you've hit the nail on the head, Pete.
Yeah. Bell Bin, for anybody that wants to go and look, it's really useful. It might be a little bit too management speak for somebody, but like you said there, if you don't go and understand the stuff that's behind how these things work, you can constantly bang your head against a wall because you don't understand that actually you do need people different from yourself. We can't just all be standing on a mountain shouting. Nothing's going to get done.
Yeah.
We spoke there about a great piece of advice that you would perhaps share with yourself, but what I often feel is one of the biggest barriers to people's development is often pieces of advice that they should have ignored. And this can come in various fashions, so I don't want to influence your answer, but what piece of common advice do you think people should ignore?
I think when people are trying to influence young people and tell them, be careful about that. And what I mean by careful about it is not to bring good ideas to the fore, or not to give an opinion that could be contrary to, the considered view on something. I think advice telling people, not to put ideas forward or not to go with something that they really believe in because it could upset maybe, the standard of thought about the particular subject is bad advice.
Don't upset the apple cart. Wait your turn.
Yeah.
Don't put your hand up.
I like the Japanese concept of Kaizen. Some guy has come up with a new way of developing, say, a car or a new modification to a car, that they set up an environment at high-level meetings that they're not allowed interrupt or contradict this new idea. And then they kind of break them up into small groups, and they get people who would normally be in conflict with that idea to support developing that idea. And I think the concept of continuous improvement is something that I really aspire to.
Yeah.
And I think to set up an organization that encourages inward reflection and to encourage youth and new ideas sometimes come from people with no experience. And I think we really need to move away from, he's only a newbie, ignore him. I think good ideas can come from anywhere, and we should encourage it,
Absolutely. Because we're not plagued with all those subconscious biases as well, that groupthink. Do you know where Kaizen came from? I
think it was originally an American academic idea that they brought to Japan after the war. And they were trying all these business theories that they could never get to work in America. And then they ended up making the biggest competition to American car makers because they created a monster of efficiency.
Yeah. So during the war, it was actually, you were absolutely right. It happened post the Second World War, I think it was, because during the war, we sent off all of our men and managers to go to the front line and manage the troops. So what we had to do was all of our women and our workforce that had left the factories, we had to come up with a way of being far more efficient. So we came up with the process, which originally, I'm going to get this wrong now, it's called the end of line process or something like that. And then we wanted to help rebuild them because what we appreciated was there was a massive population there, and we wanted them to get back on their feet and help them with manufacturing and help rebuild them and all this sort of stuff. So what we did was we took a lot of our really intelligent, the man's name, I want to remember his name. There was a gentleman they sent over who was like an economist and also worked in a lot of factories. And he went over there and helped them rebuild some of their infrastructures, taught them about 5Y processes, taught them about Six Sigma, taught them about large-scale problem solving and efficiencies and marginal gains.
Just in time.
Just in time. Thank you. That was what it was. It was that process in America, just in time. And they had the end-of-line cord where they would have large-scale manufacturing in vehicle processes where they could flag an issue. Because what they would do is they'd wait till a vehicle came off the end of the assembly line and then they'd just bash out all the problems. But they realized if they could stop the problems at the origins where they happened, they created a really, really seamless, efficient process. And they swallowed it. They bought the farm over there in China, and that's what then led to them being such a colossal power in terms of fast-moving consumer goods lines and manufacturing and stuff like that, because they completely adopted it. The problem is, at the end of the war, all of our managers and men came back and took over the factories again, and they threw it all out. They threw out the baby with the bathwater, and we went back to the old recognized methods. And we then sent the individual, went over with his just-in-time method, and they used it. And then they developed it into Kaizen. And now we know it as Kaizen, when actually it did originate from America. But you're right, and I love what you said about having that self-awareness to challenge yourself internally. Have you heard of red teams?
I didn't.
Red teams as a military process where they would put together their strategic objectives and how they're going to go about a deployment, and then they would have a red team that would effectively poke holes in all of their approaches. So all of their biases where they were like, oh, we predict the team is going to do this, we predict that the enemy's going to do this, and the red team would go about things in a different strategic fashion to see how they would react to things. And this was also seen in things like, have you seen pre-mortems? Have you heard of that process?
No, it sounds great.
So a pre-mortem is, everybody knows what a post-mortem is. Somebody dies, we think about what's gone wrong. A pre-mortem is you and I, we're organising an event next Tuesday, a charity event, or we're putting together whatever. And then a pre-mortem is similar to a red team where we would go, okay, let's imagine the event is on Tuesday. Let's imagine we're sitting together now, Wednesday morning, and the event has gone colossally wrong. What reasons might this have gone wrong? And what might we want to put in place to mitigate that outcome? Now, some of it we're not going to do, because one of the outcomes might be, well, a meteor hit the middle of it and then everybody died. Okay, what can we do about that? We could build a big structure that protects us from meteor. Okay, we haven't got the technology, it's very expensive. So you come up with an effort reward matrix where you go, how is the things that are high value, high reward, low effort that we could put in place that will mitigate the outcome of these things? And they were a series that I appreciate. I've just talked to you for ages and gone down a rabbit hole there, but these are wonderful things. Like, you just inspired me when you shared that. And these are so many things that we need to adopt more of, but it takes so much self-awareness, John. These are things that people, they're going to have to let go of some of those old mindsets to fully adopt these things. And we will all benefit from it, but it's just a tough process to drag people through.
And the big debate thing, it's actually okay to make mistakes. You don't learn from doing it right. And it's creating an environment where people aren't afraid to be innovative. And what I like to do is create an environment where I say to people, and I really mean this, by the way, I don't want you to agree with me all the time.
No, please challenge me.
If we're all in agreement, somebody's redundant.
Absolutely.
So I think we create an environment where we encourage people to be innovative and make mistakes in the right places, of course. You don't want them to make mistakes in the middle of an incident.
No.
If you just to trial new ideas. But if you know what I'm saying. So it's constant improvement. It's constant encouraging of new people. And succession management is a big part of our job, and not losing skills. And I really am keen bringing on the new guy, bring on the young guy.
You said a little bit there around just sort of failure as we were closing that question. So I want that to sort of feed into this next one, which is when we look at, be it failure, be it learning, or maybe the hardest moment in the job, what do you think has been one of your hardest lessons or your hardest moment in the job? And also, have you ever been afraid in the job?
This is going to sound like I'm a bit mad. As a firefighter, adrenaline tends to mask fear. And you reach a state of awareness when you are inside a fire that you very rarely reach in the outside world. And it's quite something that can be addictive. So I would say this, that I've been at lots and lots of fires, and I can't honestly say during the incident that you're actually feeling fearful. But afterwards, when you think about it, when you in the quiet moments after, you go, oh my God, that was a bit close. So in the years of being operational, the hardest moments are always child fatalities. They're the worst. No doubt about it. That I know this sounds awful, but if you have somebody that they're very mature and they have a fatal accident, to some degree, you can deal with that because you feel, listen, they had a decent run, that kind of thing. But when it's a child, that's very difficult. And I think most firefighters will say that. From an officer's point of view, which is slightly different, the hardest thing to do, I think, sometimes is to stop firefighters going in because they're pre-programmed to go in and get on with it. Yeah. And sometimes the hardest thing to do is to stop them going in because the level of risk is unacceptable. So that can be difficult, and because you're considering at that moment that decision could result in a fatality. So it's a balancing act. A firefighter, as I said earlier, we're pre-programmed as firefighters, we're going in. Whereas officers, you have to consider when that's not the right thing to do. And that can be difficult. So you're kind of going against almost a natural instinct, but you have to do it. So that's what I would say has been the hardest moments,
It's like a privileged perspective, isn't it, as well? Because somebody's standing so close to something and they can see what they believe to be a logical solution and they just want to get after it. They're hungry and you want that. I would rather have that than people that aren't enthusiastic. You can harness and steer enthusiasm. It's hard to nurture enthusiasm. I would rather have somebody that's really enthusiastic and really eager that has a low skill set, because you, as you demonstrated in our conversation today, you can train a skill set. It's hard to train enthusiasm. So we don't want to diminish that in people. But like you say, when you step back as an incident commander and you've got a more holistic view of the dangers inherent in what this person's about to do, but they're not stood where you are and they haven't got the perspective and they haven't had the benefit of all the information from the collective situational awareness that you have. So reining somebody in there is so difficult, because you've been in their shoes, you know how they feel. But you're in a different place now. And like you say, when you know better, you've got to do better.
I think so. Yeah, I think so.
I wanted to close with what I often think is kind of my favorite question. And this is, it's just me being romantic about the job, but I always love it. What do you think are some of the characteristics needed to be a great firefighter?
You know what? It's actually quite similar to being a great chief, if you know what I mean. I would say foundationally, a firm understanding that we're here to serve the public. I think great firefighters should have a dedication to continuous improvement and never arriving at a point where I'm a senior man, I can't be taught anything new. I think a great firefighter should want to be the best firefighter, rather than not just be an average firefighter. They should be good communicators. They should have humility. They should never lose touch with the fact that they were a recruit once and they were only started. And they should stay connected to the reason why they joined. And hopefully it was the right reason. And then the other great feature of a fantastic firefighter, or the classic senior man, if you want, is someone who's constantly aware they need to develop their successor.
John, I feel like I could speak to you for another 5 hours. I want to be respectful of your time, but man, thank you so much. I want to thank a lot of associated friends for introducing us to each other. I think I had about 3 pages of notes in front of me that I had prior to our conversation, and I seem to have finished with those 3 plus 2 pages of notes on the back of the 3 pages. So I have certainly taken, I don't feel like I've walked away with a deficit, put it that way. I've taken so much away from our conversation, and this is why I encourage people to go and find those people that have those nuggets and make sure you capture them and sit with people of experience and try and capture that. I know people will have taken a lot from our conversation. I have certainly taken a lot from it, and I want to thank you for sacrificing time away from your family and your loved ones to give us the gift.
Can I say something to you? Yeah. This has been a privilege for me. Listen to you very carefully. You really have all the attributes to someone to go and take the lead and succeed people like Paul Grimwood. You have a fantastic knowledge and you have an awful lot to give. And I just want to say to you, don't ever think for a minute that you can't lead and you can't lead the way for the British Fire Service. You have some future ahead of you. I'm telling you that. And come here, you would be letting your abilities down if you don't maximise that. Now, I can see you going off and doing degrees and PhDs in psychology. I can see you getting honours and all that. But as well as that, you have so much to give to the fire service. So come here. It's my privilege. So thank you so much.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. And the knowledge I try and share with people is solely that which I've learned from people such as yourself. So it's very much benefiting on standing on the shoulders of giants such as yourself. So send my love to the family, and I will speak to you very soon, boss.
Thanks, Pete. Mind yourself. Bye-bye.
Hey, folks. Pete here, just jumping back in. Wow. I mean, John Chubb, that guy, oh man, I just love that conversation. John is such 60 years of age. Really? I don't believe it. I'm not buying it. I know you guys are only hearing the audible, right? But I saw him. That dude doesn't look 60. And I don't know if it's just a reflection of the passion with which he communicates. It just screams the energy of a man significantly younger than perhaps many of us would identify. But again, maybe that's just because we're having our own subconscious biases about how we think people of that level of experience and or age should behave. And I think John doesn't just break the mold. I think he breaks the whole factory in the level of passion that he is still bringing to his duties. A massive thanks to John. There's so many takeaways from today's episode. So many. If you're still listening now, then that's because you've enjoyed it maybe as much as I have. I'm going to selfishly say I enjoyed it far more. And I just want to say thank you to you for entrusting us with our time. Time is the one irredeemable asset which we're never going to get back. And you have just entrusted your time to myself and John, and we don't take that for granted. If it is anything to go by from today's conversation, I am going to be bowled over with several more pages of notes from the incredible people as we delve further into the world of the emergency services and swim in the ocean of experience and knowledge that they've gathered. I look forward to seeing you again real soon, right here on the Firefighters Podcast.